every dollar that you spend in marketing, you should be spending at least 10 cents of that, 10% of that, and analytics so you can understand where's the best way to put those dollars.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working in E-commerce. I'm your host, Egan Heath, the owner of Caravan Digital. We're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce agency. Today, I'm speaking with Jeff Greenfield. Jeff is from Provalytics, and he is an expert in the field of attribution and analytics. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you so much, Egan. It's a pleasure to be here and talk about my favorite subject.
All right. Well, we've got a lot going on. I was telling you just today, I did a GA4 webinar, and I'm still wiping the sweat off my brow. Where do we stand on analytics right now? What is the landscape? And maybe talk a bit about where you guys fit in.
Yeah, we are in the midst of a major revolution, if you will, in terms of attribution, in terms of measurement, a major disruption. And this happens because of all of the changes that we're seeing. We've got this cookie apocalypse that's coming up next year, where cookies are going to be deprecated in Chrome. We've had all the iOS changes that have happened over the last year or so. Firefox is stripping URLs. And now we've got all this privacy regulation going on in pretty much every single state in the US. So the things that worked in the past, since the birth of digital, are not working as we move forward. So as a result, we have to kind of look at things a bit differently. And the biggest shift, if we kind of go back before digital was around, the forms of media we had, none of it was deterministic, meaning if someone watched a TV ad, there were no clicks, but they would just walk in a store and buy something. The same is true of radio and print. The only way that you had to track things was through 800 numbers on TV ads. And when a customer would walk in with a coupon, you could track that back maybe to direct mail. So the way that measurement worked back in the day is it was probabilistic. We would use something called marketing mix modeling, but it was somewhat limited, and it was always called a marketing mix modeling study because it was research. You had to collect a lot of data. It would take months to put the study together and months to get the results. So most big brands would only do them once a year, sometimes a couple of years it would take them to do them. When digital came around, we started getting information back so much faster. And in the early days of attribution, we could collect the entire digital trail. So if someone even got exposed to an ad on Facebook, we would know it from a measurement perspective. And attribution was built on the concept that you could collect this entire digital customer journey, and you could lay it out in a date and time-stamped order of things, run machine learning on it, and figure out what was working and what wasn't working. But now in this new era, with all of this cookie stuff going on, the walled gardens, we're now living in a world where that path is no longer there. So we kind of have to go back to the world of marketing mix modeling. We kind of have to go back to a world where we're looking at things more probabilistically. And so Provalytics is attribution and planning evolved for this new cookieless and privacy-centric world that we're living in. And it's designed primarily for enterprise customers, so larger folks that are having these always-on budgets. But there's a lot of lessons for smaller marketers that we can use as takeaway in our discussion today to kind of help them move along, because all of the lessons for direct-to-consumer brands that are emerging, all the big brands have already been through it. There's really very few new things out there. You just have to kind of look through the tea leaves and figure out what's going to work for your brand and what's not going.
Pretty interesting. The Firefox I wanted to ask you about, is that's going to strip out, say, UTM parameters or any campaign tracking you're doing? Is that right?
Yeah, it's going to strip all that stuff out. And there's a lot of companies out there that are using so-called cookieless tracking. They're using browser fingerprinting. And what's going to happen once cookies are deprecated and they're completely gone from Chrome, the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to go through and start to clamp down on any type of browser fingerprinting that's going on. Anything that tries to circumvent and connect users across different sites, that's going to be going away as well. It may take another year or so, but eventually the ability to connect people across different sites, the only way you're going to be able to do that is in a clean room environment, which is primarily set up for these much, much larger brands because it requires a significant investment.
It's almost hard to picture. I think this is just slowly sinking in for me, what you're saying, because we've been in such a, direct response sort of mode where we can do what's return on ad spend, what's cost per acquisition, and so on. I'm curious, conversions API or CAPI in, meta ads, I believe that's server side. Is that still going to exist in the future?
That will still exist in the future because remember, the CAPI helps to supplement the cookies and the loss of the iOS that's there. So you're still going to be able to get information at the partner level, at the platform level. The problem you're going to run into is, so if you're a marketer and you've built your entire brand just in Facebook and you're living in the Facebook environment, this is not going to impact you at all. You're going to be in great shape. You can rely upon the Facebook platform metrics. But the minute you start spending money in Google, and then you start to spend money, let's say on the trade desk for some programmatic, some ad roll or Criteo for retargeting, maybe a little CTV here, maybe a little programmatic direct mail, and you start spreading it out. Let's throw in some Outbrain. Now you've got 5 or 6 different platforms that are all giving you different answers. Well, they're giving you their answers. They're giving you their version of the truth. But the problem you run into is that if you have 100 sales in a day and you start to add up all these and take it from the platform and put it in a spreadsheet, you're going to end up with, if you have 5 partners, you're going to end up with probably saying that you had 500 sales. So I like to say for every sale, you had 5 mothers or 5 fathers who are all claiming credit. That's my child. That's a bad situation. So historically, this problem has been around for a while. So what most marketers have done is they came up with some sort of math to figure it out. And this is where we really got into trouble, because when the iOS changes came about, everyone was doing their own kind of haircut on Facebook. So you would look at the Facebook numbers and the Facebook said, hey, out of 100 orders, we got you 80 of them. You would just cut the Facebook numbers in half. That's what a lot of people did. Facebook's numbers were 40. Well, when the iOS changes came about, Facebook's numbers changed from 80 to 40, but people were still cutting it in half. So the first message I have for most direct-to-consumer marketers is to say, hey, your demographic that was on Facebook before the iOS changes, they're still there. Facebook knows exactly who they are, and Facebook is still performing as well as it did before, but their reporting is just bad. So the numbers we're used to getting from Facebook, they're still just as good. That's probably one of the first big takeaways. It's just that Facebook is blinded a bit, even with the CAPI. It's still a bit blind. And that's kind of a scary thing. But the problem you have is that first you have to aggregate these things together. So there's companies out there like funnel.io. You clicked authenticate, and now you've got this all coming together. You're getting the platform metrics, but you're getting them in one place. And then there's companies that will layer on a light analytics layer on top of it, like the Triple Whales and the Northbeams of the world. They'll do the aggregation, and then they'll do some attribution on top of it. I'll say it's light attribution because they're not taking into account things like impressions at an impression level. It's primarily still last click or first click and things like that. But it is light years ahead of Google Analytics, which is a great thing. And so that for folks who are worried about the GA to GA4 transition, and they should be, having something like that in your corners is a great solution at a very low cost.
It's very interesting about the impressions. I think, again, in this world that I'm swimming in here, in terms of, our clients and then other agencies that we talk to, the most we ever want to give to impressions, at least on Facebook, is maybe 1-day view, 7-day click. But it sounds like you're thinking that those views are valuable. They should be in the mix of attribution. Can you kind of make the case for that?
Yeah, it's real easy. I'll use the example of the fact that we're on a podcast, which thousands of people are going to listen to, and they're going to be influenced by it. There's lots of advertisers on podcasts, and Joe Rogan, I know, has one of the most popular podcasts in the world. Brands spend money on there. The Howard Stern Show on Sirius XM, one of the most popular satellite radio shows. A lot of brands have been built on these 2 different audio channels, if you will, but there's no clicks. There's no tab inside of Google Analytics for podcast or audio. There's no tab in Triple Whale for them as well. So the question is, how do you account for those? And you have to step back a little bit further, because when you start looking at new emerging channels, like, for example, CTV, which is essentially television but digitized, there's nothing for people to click on there either. And new channels like TikTok and the next TikTok of tomorrow, there probably won't be anything to click on. So how do you account for these? So when we looked to build out Provalytics a little over a year and a half ago, we started thinking about what is it that's going to unify? What does the future of media look like? What is it that me as a marketer, what am I going to be able to get out of anything I buy? Well, I'll know how much money I spent. I'll know what creative ran, and I'll know how many impressions or views I got. So you have to have a unifying metric when you're doing a modeling exercise and doing the science of modeling. You have to unify things with something that is the same. So it's not apples versus oranges, it's apples versus apples. And impressions are what work across the board. The nice thing about impressions is that it also works for traditional radio, traditional TV, direct mail, out of home. It works for everything. And it's a unifying metric that works across both digital and traditional media. And it works incredibly well. And so that's why we use it as a unifying metric. But you're right, there's always been these very arbitrary rules about what we call view through conversions, 1 day rule and stuff like that, which totally have nothing to do with science or statistics. One thing I'll tell everyone who's listening to Google is this concept called advertising ad stock. And the concept behind advertising ad stock is that someone sees an ad for the first time and they say, oh, wow, that's really cool, but I'm not ready to buy. I don't even want to click on it, but it puts a little message in the back of the brain. It builds awareness. Then they see another ad and they say, oh, that's even cooler, but they don't do anything. And then all of a sudden they see a third or a fourth ad, and then they just go direct to the URL and they buy. I'll give you a great example of that. My daughter, who runs social and programmatic media for a large B2B firm on the West Coast, she had a client. It's a seasonal client. That's all I can say about it. They have a very short season, very limited budget, and very rigid in terms of what they were spending on. But she wanted to test for them CTV. She just knew it would work for them, and it was getting to the end of the season, and she got approved for a test. And so what did she do? She went into Google Analytics. She found cities where purchases had happened before. She could see what the average conversion rate was. Went all in for a single week for a CTV buy in one city. Well, wouldn't you know it, this was at the end of the season. And when they looked at the results for that week, conversion rates were dropping across every single city in the US, except for that one city. Now, how is it that conversion rate went up? Well, because they did CTV. Were there any clicks from that CTV? No. Where did they see clicks come from? Well, they came in through branded search and organic. So there's no way to account for that. And there's no view throughs to even measure for that. So the future of media looks like no view throughs, no clicks, no nothing, but it's just kind of out there. And that's why I talk about this kind of back to the future concept. That's why we need to return to the measurement that we used in the past or something similar to it. But what that also means is that all marketers are going to have to start thinking about things differently. And right now, we have this whole generation of marketers that have been brought up that data is the new oil, more data is better. And what we've seen is the reality is something different. I'll tell you, one of my favorite books, like the #1 marketing book ever, is this book, Lemon, How the Advertising Brain Turned Sour by Orlando Wood. It will change your life in terms of marketing. Now, there's 2 graphs in the beginning of this book that talk about this pivot that happened in marketing in 2006. So a little history lesson. Before 2006, in 2000 was the dot-com crash. So that's when these internet stocks just tanked. So around 2004, in the US, all of the TV stations and radio station owners, they were saying, and the newspaper folks, they were saying, can you believe these internet people? They were saying just a couple of years ago that we were going to be going out of business. Isn't that the craziest thing? And they were laughing about the internet because the internet had gone down. Well, so what happened in 2006? Board of directors of big companies were asking CMOs, what is our World Wide Web strategy? And so the CMO would talk to the marketing folks and they would start doing some tests with digital. And what they found with digital was really remarkable because they would do a test and they would get this report back with clicks and they could actually see what was actually occurring. And so in 2006, brands started devoting more money to digital tactics, which are, let's be honest, are all lower funnel. And so over time, brands started moving more and more budget over to these lower funnel tactics. So what happens when you move money from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel? Your funnel is smaller, which means your reach is less, you're advertising to fewer people. So that's a graph that goes up. They talk about that in the book. It's called the rise in short-termism, which has happened, and it's happened for many, many years. There's another graph that also starts in 2006, and that graph goes down dramatically. And that's the decrease in ad effectiveness. And that's occurred because brands are spending more money lower funnel. Now, we have an entire industry now about lower funnel advertising, and it's really taken off. Think about retail media. There's nothing more lower funnel than someone adding some soap to their shopping cart on Walmart.com, and the Irish Spring folks say, hey, we'll give you $1 off if you add this to your cart. So there's more and more money being devoted to lower funnel, which makes marketing work even harder. So this new generation of marketers, we need to start thinking about panning the camera back. We need to step back from the detail of the user level and start thinking big picture and start thinking, how can we get more people into the top of our funnel? And how can we impact them? And then how can we use the tools that we have, like e-commerce and the customer experience, and improve that so we get customers who have loyalty to us and keep coming back? Because media's job is to fill that funnel. Right now, I see a lot of marketers that are focused that media's job is just get them at the bottom of the funnel. But we've seen that brands like Airbnb, they've stopped all their lower funnel advertising. They focused on brand, and that when you spend more money on upper funnel, you get a much, much bigger response. And I think smaller brands can even start testing into upper funnel techniques, just like that example that I talked about that my daughter used. You run a CTV test very inexpensively in just one geo. Hell, you can even do it in a single county if you want. But doing those types of tests and doing them as geo tests and seeing the impact, that's the way that as your organization starts to grow, you can also go to finance and say, hey, I need more money to spend on this because it's actually working. And that's what's really exciting about measurement, is being able to build your budget and build your team by being able to test into different techniques, especially upper funnel. And upper funnel is going to pay off better than anything else you can ever try.
Wow. I started so skeptical here, Jeff, and you're making a darn good case. I just bought that book. I have a quick story to tell, which is the first guest ever who came on this show was one of our clients in the health and supplement space, really a brick and mortar here in Madison, Wisconsin. And as soon as we started running Facebook ads, we do broad targeting, even national targeting. When we do the breakdown of what states are people buying in, Facebook was finding everyone was converting in the Madison, Wisconsin area, because for years he had advertised on TV and radio. And so we couldn't get the system out without saying exclude Wisconsin, basically. We couldn't get the system to stop running ads to people who'd already seen his brand ads. And so that came to mind as you were describing this.
Yeah. Did they ever go out and start running ads in other geos to test it to grow further?
That's a good question. You're saying top of funnel, traditional marketing, TV, radio. It's a great question. Not in the time that we worked with them, but that's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, that's where you start to go, because it's really common for a lot of locally known or regionally known brands to then start to expand out. And you don't have to go national. Like, a lot of people don't know that Southwest Airlines, which is regionally based, they don't run any national advertising. All of their advertising is within that specific geo, that regional area. They know how far out people are willing to drive to the airport. They don't go outside that geos, but they run heavy TV, heavy radio, but they only run locally, even though they're in, like, I think 26 markets or so. So a lot of brands, if you're known in an area, you can test into this. This is the greatest thing about television. And CTV is easy because you can buy it like digital. Local television, though, has started to become easier to get into. There's a little bit more work. You still kind of sometimes have to call people and stuff like that. But it is a worthwhile skill. I always recommend for digital marketers that they learn how to buy local television, because there's always going to be a point at which, as they start to buy more CTV, where they're saying, wow, this is really working. But the CPMs are so high on CTV. And there's a point where it's like, hey, I could buy local in an entire state and get a much better deal than I am right now. Of course, there's some waste because the ads may be running when people don't have the TV on and stuff like that, and you're missing some of the streaming, but it's a great way to supplement and pick up in other areas as well too. So it's a good skill sets for folks to have. And let's not forget direct mail as well too. Direct mail kills. And you can target incredibly well, and it's easy to test into, and it's incredibly easy to measure too, especially with the matchback techniques. There's really nothing new in direct mail. It just works.
Wow, pretty interesting. Yeah, we had a Post Pilot come on here and talk about that as well. So that one will be coming out. It should be out before this one. The CTV, that's the same as OTT, over the top. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Someone's watching on Amazon. Someone's watching on, I don't know. My wife and I, we're cable cutters, obviously, but we love Jeopardy. And so I've got YouTube TV just for that. And so we're seeing a sense of the local ads that we never really watched before. And it's pretty darn interesting. So I'm glad you bring this up.
Yeah, and YouTube is another great place to target as well too. It used to be in the US, the most expensive advertising that you could buy would be the advertising that was the pre-roll at the movie theater. So if the movie started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, everyone would know don't show up at 3:45 because they would have like the slideshow. But at 4, they would start the previews, and everybody would want to be there for the previews. So previews would start, and then like 2 or 3 ads would go. We would call it pre-roll because you knew everybody was in their seat at that time. And you could do a great job targeting because think about if you knew who your customer was, you could target based upon type of movie and geo. But now with YouTube, you can even get more detailed. So one of the first things I recommend for direct-to-consumer brands, and a lot of them that are founder-run, they know who their customer is. They have a really good idea of the persona. And you start thinking about, okay, what types of YouTube videos are our folks watching? And then you start to target those with pre-roll. And pre-roll, as you know, you can't skip it. And that is some great inventory. And you can also do it in a specific geo. So you can kind of say, okay, this is like CTV, but we're targeting a specific persona and a specific geo. And I'm telling you, if you try that, just spend a couple of grand on it and then step back. And what you want to look at is don't expect you're going to see sales go up right away. That's not always going to happen. Because remember, media's job is to build awareness. What you will see, almost guaranteed, unless your creative really stinks, what you will see is you'll start to see the amount of organic traffic in that geo will start to increase. You'll start to see your brand search clicks will start to go up gradually. And the number of impressions that you'll see in brand search will also start to go up within that geo. And you'll say, maybe there's a there to this. And there really is. And then over time, depending upon what your sales cycle is, you'll start to see some increase in sales start to trickle in from that geo. And it may not even be enough to where statistically you'll say, this ROI was good. But if you double down and you start to do some more tests on it, you'll start to see, wow, this really works. Really, really works. And the best place to start is start in geos where you already have a good conversion rate. What you want to look at is you want to look and see, can I increase the conversion rate, meaning increase the rate that people convert? Is this going to help people move through the funnel faster? And another good way to do is to also do retargeting on YouTube for people who don't convert in that specific geo. So you can do both prospecting and retargeting and those geos. Those are some great simple tests to run. And then you'll be like a genius at your organization. People will love you.
I love it. What kind of time frame do you counsel clients on? Is this a 3, 6, 12 month sort of thing? How long does the test need to run?
For a test like that, you really only need, depending upon the type of product that folks are selling, if it's a type of product that people see it and they say, oh my God, I got to have this type of thing, you could run a test like that. And in fact, most good geo tests typically run maybe 1 to 2 months. But I think if you run something like that and you've never done anything like that, I would be checking the numbers every week because I think you would start to see an uplift pretty quickly. For most of our clients, when they run tests, it's usually they run them for about a quarter because the scale that they're running things at. Typically for larger advertisers, they don't want to devote a huge budget to a small test. And the problem is that when you're spending tens to $20 million or more per month, when you run like $100,000 test, that's barely like a ripple in the pond. So it takes longer to see the results for something like that. But for a smaller brand, you'll start to see it rather quickly.
I'm feeling cognitive dissonance over here. I feel like I've really been schooled on, the Dan Kennedy school of direct response, but I'm so intrigued here. Jeff, my instinct when I'm thinking, okay, let's say we go offline, or let's say we go non-click, right? It's a TV ad. My first thing is I want a QR code, I want a promo code, I want to track it somehow. If it's a podcast, I want to at least have a promo code there. If it's a direct mail, maybe I want a particular link I send them to. I'm still going attribution like that. Do I need to give that up? Am I thinking the wrong way?
Well, one of the things to think about, so let's go back to linear television. Even though CTV is great and everything like that, the biggest events on television still is live television, especially sports. So you can't beat that. So if you're going to run, let's say a local spot, or let's even say a national spot during like a football season, that's absolutely incredible. And anyone that's run TV, national television, what you will see is you will see the average amount of traffic coming to your website. Now, you have to separate traffic. There's paid traffic that comes in through UTM, and then there's your branded search that comes in. There's your organic, and there's your SEO. And back in my earlier days at C3 Metrics, my first measurement company, we used to call that BOSS, brand search, organic, and SEO. So what happens is when someone is sitting on the couch watching football and they see an ad that captures their attention, they don't go and look for a display ad to click on it. They don't go and type in category. They're like, oh, xyz.com. They go right there, or they'll go xyz.com into Google and they'll click on your brand search ad. So what you will see is you'll see your normal traffic, and then you will see this massive spike in traffic go up based upon how big of an ad you run. So even if you run just a local ad during a live event and you're like, oh, everyone's on streaming, trust me, run like a $300 ad on your like local cable provider during a sporting event. You will be shocked how much traffic you will see spike up to your site. Now it will spike up, and then within like 1 or 2 minutes, it'll drop right back down again. And that's what happens in the world of direct response TV. Back in the old days, where the way we would track it is we would send out our VHS ads to all of the local stations, and each ad would be different because it would have a separate 800 number. And what we would see in the call center is all of a sudden, this is before the internet, all of a sudden calls would start to increase on one number. And what would happen is the calls would come in and we knew the ad was running. And as soon as the ad was off, the calls would start to die down. But over the next hour or so, we would still get calls coming in. And the funny thing is that if we didn't run an ad on that station for another week, we would still see calls coming in for like the next week or two. They would just spread out. People would write down the phone number. And so it's important to understand the relationship between traditional offline, non-click type media, impression-based media, and the internet and the website. People will find it. Now, the problem with podcast is it's not a live event. People download it. They'll listen to it whenever they want to listen to it. So you're not going to see that spike. You would see that spike in traditional audio and radio, but you wouldn't see that in podcasts. But in podcasts, as you start to do more advertising, start to do more mentions, you will start to see over time your impression share and the number of people just showing up. And in fact, if you have a brand that is showing up in Google Trends, if all of a sudden you start to advertise in podcasts, you will notice over time the number of people, your trend data will start to rise. And it's like, okay, what's going on there? Well, people are starting to hear more about you. And that's what's exciting about this stuff, is that there are ways to see it, but that's where as you start to spend more money and media that doesn't have clicks and only has impressions, that's where you step back and you say, okay, over the weekend, maybe I'll start to learn a little bit about regression analysis. Maybe I'll do a little regression using daily impression volume, and you'll start to see about how many impressions, how many mentions do I have in each market every single day, and maybe start to do a little analysis on your own. And you don't have to be a mathematical genius to start to look at things like that and start to look at correlations of, okay, when I correlate visitors to the site to impressions and market, what am I starting to see? And it's not about sales, because media's job is not to drive sales. It's to drive interested people to come and check you out. It's the website's job to act as a salesperson and actually sell your stuff. A lot of us tend to forget that because it's very easy if you're a marketer and you're buying ads for a client, things are killing it. And then all of a sudden sales go down. Client calls you up on the phone and says, what's going on? Are you buying bad Facebook ads? And it's like, and then they find out later, they're like, oh, I'm sorry. We had an error on our website. People couldn't check out for a day. And it's like, yeah, I know. Even if they just change a button color, that's going to impact conversion rate. So marketers, you always want to be looking at site conversion rate, but your job as a marketer is to get more interested people to visit the website every day. And that's what I would do my regression on myself and learn how to do that yourself, because you're going to need to do that as you start to do more offline type stuff that doesn't have a click trail.
Pretty intriguing, Jeff. Yeah, I wanted to ask of how does this alchemy work? Let's say there is no promo code. It makes sense of give yourself credit or give your YouTube ads or podcast ads or whatever credit if we're seeing a difference in branded search, if we're seeing a difference in direct to the site potentially. Those have to be factored in. I know you've got some science training in your background. Is there a 10,000 level you can give us of how does this work? How do you know? Particularly, let's say it is a small brand. They've got radio ads, they've got TV ads, they're dabbling in Spotify ads or something like that. Outside of promo codes and things like that, how do they separate it out? How do they know what's doing what?
So one of the most popular ways today is you have to kind of triangulate things. If you're not ready to invest in data and analytics, and I mean, this is what you should be looking at. What you should be looking at is that every dollar that you spend in marketing, you should be spending at least 10 cents of that, 10% of that, and analytics so you can understand where's the best way to put those dollars. Now, even big brands don't do that, but that's a good number to start thinking about as you start to grow. But let's say you're using GA. What are some other things you should do? We should understand GA, where they're coming from. It's just click-based. So that's one version of the truth. And I always like to look at this as though it's like a car accident at a corner. And there's one person on each corner, and there's those 4 people there, and the police go and talk to them. There's this show that's on TV now called On Patrol, and it follows these live police officers every Friday and Saturday night. It's a great, great show. But what ends up happening is when they have an accident and there's always these corners, they start asking people what happened. And they get completely different perspectives on what's going on. And it's a police officer's job to figure out what is actually the answer, what's actually going on here. So I would say that what you need to do is you look at GA and understand that's one view of the world. Then you maybe want to be running a triple whale and ask it to run first click attribution. That's going to give you a completely different picture. And then you want to be looking at what's become very popular is what we call zero-party attribution. And zero-party attribution is where you ask people on like your thank you page or during the checkout process, how did you hear about us? Now, there's been a lot of studies that have shown that based upon how you ask the question, how did you hear about us? Where did you first learn about our brand? The order in which they're asked, you're going to get completely different answers, which means you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's like a police lineup. People's recollection is really, really bad. And also, you don't want to put anything in the way of the purchase process as well. So that's why I always say, put this on your thank you page after you've gotten the credit card swiped. But that gives you a different perspective. So you need to marry the fact of last click or Google's view of the world, as they're now calling their data-driven attribution. Maybe layer in some Facebook platform data, a first click view of the world, and the zero party. And you need to put it all together in a spreadsheet. And then you just have to start looking at, and you need to be tracking when you made changes. And that's one of the most important things is what changes did you make? Now, if you're doing lots of changes all at the same time, you're probably going to have a lot of difficulty in figuring things out. The best thing to do is to make one change and sit on your hands for like a week or two and then see what happens. Did it make a difference? And the things I would be looking at is when you make a change is look at your organic traffic. Look at that boss. Look at the rise in brand search clicks or brand search impressions, which you can look at inside of your Google ads. Look at your organic clicks. Do you start to see those rise? If you see those things rise, then you can say, okay, this thing I did is actually working pretty good. Now, the way to be smart about it is only test these things in different geos. That way you can see, I only changed one thing in Dayton, Ohio. Do I see a rise in Dayton, Ohio? Yes, I did. Great. Now add 2 or 3 other geos. Do I see the same rise there? Okay, great. I think I'm onto something. And that's the way I would do it if I didn't have an analytics budget. But I would still always be looking at all of those things: last click, first click. And most important is, what are our customers saying? Where are they hearing about things? Because influencers are a huge thing these days, but there's no clicks, there's no view throughs. Influencers can use coupon codes, but the problem is anyone who's used coupon codes, as soon as a coupon code gets out there, every coupon site in the world starts using it, and it gets out there, and then it becomes, within 2 weeks, it's completely unreliable. So you need to kind of take all of that in mind. And then it becomes a little bit of alchemy. You're right about that, Egan. It's a little bit of magic putting it all together. But that's why you change only one thing at a time in the early days. And then once you start to grow and you start to scale, that's when you have to start investing dollars and the right types of analytics that can get you to that next level and that can scale in this newfangled, futuristic, privacy-centric, no cookie world that we're living in.
Wow, pretty amazing. Tell us a bit about Provalytics. Who's a good fit for that, Jeff, and how should they reach out to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to reach out is go to the site and check us out at provalytics.com. One of the things that we've done and that I've done for the last 10 or so years as I've been in this space is that there's a lot of measurement products that are out there in the market, and we're definitely not the right fit for a lot of folks. And I've been putting together a scorecard or a playbook for the last 10 years or so. And we updated it right at the beginning of this year and we put it out. It's our playbook. It's right on the website. You can't miss it. You can go there and download it, check it out. It's actually in an Excel spreadsheet, and it lists about 20 or so criteria. And what that'll do is that'll give you a good idea of like, okay, is this important to me? Is that important to me? Because for some folks, certain things aren't important, like the validity of the model. Like some folks, they just want to have better measurement. It's not important to them that the measurement is able to prove and demonstrate, hey, this worked. But as you start to spend more dollars, that's definitely going to become important. For some folks, I'm not going to do TV or CTV. I'm only going to be digital. So you don't need something that actually measures those things. So it allows you to put in your criteria and figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. The brands that are best for Provalytics are brands that are spending in excess of 20 million or more per year. These are typically brands that are already scaling, that you've reached a point where you find, if you're an e-commerce brand and you're acquiring customers, that maintaining that CAC, that cost per acquisition that worked so well months ago, is having more difficulty for you. And you're starting to spread out of the Facebook and the Google universe and trying other things. And you're having difficulty figuring out what's working and what's not working. And of course, the larger brands that are always on. And the problem when you're always on in terms of media is it's very tough when you start adding new things to figure out, did it actually have an impact or not? That's who's best for Provalytics. But by all means, all listeners should go there, check it out, and download the playbook, because that'll help you on your analytics journey to figure out what you need and who's the best fit for you at the time that you're at right now.
Yeah, that's great. How are you doing on time, Jeff?
Oh, I'm great. Doing great on time. We can go a little bit longer if you need be, Egan. That'd be great.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about your journey to this. I know you had a science background. I'm seeing maybe you were a chiropractor. Is that right? Tell us about how you got into this.
It's a funny journey. I'll try to keep it down to like 5 minutes at the most. And it starts with magic. You know, I think all kids get involved with magic. They love it. I love it. I just never got out of it. So I did it all throughout my undergrad, and I wanted to go in the sciences. I wanted to be a doctor, but I really loved magic and used my hands. I was a close-up magician, worked at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, and I thought chiropractic worked great because it actually used my hands. So I thought, this is perfect. But as a magician, I had to build up my own practice, and I was a solo entrepreneur for that. And then the same thing, I passed that on when I was a chiropractor and built my practice up. And that was great. And then I got injured, which wasn't so great. And I couldn't practice anymore. And at 30, I went through this like journey where I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had no idea. So I went back to magic and spent a couple of years touring the country, colleges and corporate stuff. And it was now in the mid 90s and the internet was emerging. And I had to teach myself how to make a website. And I started updating it on a regular basis. And when I was on the road, other performers were like, who's your webmaster? This is great. And I'm like, well, I do it myself. And they're like, can you help me? And I was like, yeah, I can, but this is not what I'm doing. I got injured and I'm on this whole journey to figure out what I want to do next. So before I knew it, got off the road and I was working in my house, and I was a consultant building websites. And then everyone wanted to be at the top of the search engines. This is the early days before there was even Google, go.com and Alta Vista. So I built out one of the first SEO firms, and then that led into one of the first SaaS search engine optimization softwares that could get you to the top of the search engine, called Position Solutions. And then I started getting into product placement, putting products in TV and film and brand and entertainment. But what I found is at the end of the day, the thing that kept coming back was, hey, we want to do more product placement, but we need to be able to measure how it works. And measurement kept coming back. And when digital came out, I found measurement was even more important, because finance would always get in the way of spending more money. And that led to the birth of C3 Metrics, where I built out one of the first attribution platforms at the beginning days of big data. And that's really what it was. It was this massive data exercise, collecting billions upon billions of data points every day. And when I exited C3 in 2019, I thought I would never go back to measurement. I thought I did my time there. This is it. And then I started seeing all of these changes, the iOS changes, the talk of the cookie collapse, the cookie apocalypse, which is now coming up next year. And I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to see what's out there in the marketplace. I'm going to invest in some of these brands that are out there and be an advisor. And I started seeing that most of the measurement companies, like, listen, Triple Whale and Northbeam, they do an amazing job, but it's the layer up from Google Analytics, which is perfect for most direct-to-consumer brands that are on Shopify. And that's the space they want to be. But for the enterprise brands, which is where I was at with C3 previously, they're kind of stuck in the cold. They don't have a solution right now. And so then on top of it, I saw the disruption of GA to GA4. And I was like, this is, as an entrepreneur, we love disruption. And I thought, I'm going to jump back in again. And so a little over a year ago, that was the birth of Provalytics. And what's amazing is the stuff that we can do now with the platform level data that we couldn't do before because of AI and machine learning, and how many cycles we can run in the cloud for the cost that we can do it at. We can get to answers so much faster than we're ever able to get to before. And we're able to take the platform level data and output attribution level granular results, just like we're able to do with MTA in the early days, but without having to collect that user level data. And that's what's exciting, and to me is really sexy. I like it because we're able to get to the same type of answers we were able to get to before, but without having that user level data, and do it in a privacy centric manner, which is so important for the large banks and the pharmaceutical companies and the folks that are always on and media out there today.
Wow, that's great. I'm so glad I asked about that, Jeff. Love your journey. I was a huge fan of magic and always have been. So I didn't even know what you meant at first, but you were a magician doing actual in-person tricks. So that's wonderful. From, magician to chiropractor to web analytics and more. That's just what a journey. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, well, thank you so much. We'll see what comes next. Right now, it's Provalytics. Like I said, the next year and a half, 2 years in measurement is major, major disruption for any folks out there, without a doubt.
Love it. Well, folks, if you're listening to this or you're watching, check out Jeff Greenfield on LinkedIn. You can go to provalytics.com to learn more, and definitely check out that 2023 attribution playbook. I'm definitely going to look at that. So, Jeff, thank you for coming on and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Thank you so much, Egan. It's been a pleasure.